Good morning, and thank you all for being here in short notice. My name is Senator Melissa Franzen. I represent Senate District 49, and we are here today with a coalition of faith leaders. And it does not matter where you stand on the immigrant issue, whether you're pro or against immigration reform. People from all backgrounds were appalled at the taking the children away from their parents and housing them in a big box store a few weeks ago. Children and families are still in peril, even after the recent executive order to end the zero-tolerance policy separating families at the border. As a state legislator, an attorney by trade, and as a mother of two young children, I believe the priority of the United States should be to respect its own rule of law and due process. But we have heard too much rhetoric from the extremes of the political spectrum, and what we need is change. We need to change our laws to reflect this immigration crisis that is not new, but has reached a heightened level of attention by all Americans. I'm hopeful and thankful that a diverse group of faith leaders are here today to support that change for the benefit of our communities and our humanity as Americans. The power of the faith community being mobilized is exemplary of how we should be tackling this issue regardless of where you stand on the immigration debate. It is significant that the faith communities represented here today and many others that could not make it are in fact asking us to put pressure on our federal government to change the current situation. They expect more from our government and from our leaders. The fact is that Congress and the White House is controlled by one party, and they have the ability to address this issue today. I want to take a moment to recognize some of the legislators here in attendance: Senator John Isakson, Senator Patricia Torres Ray, Senator Carrie Dietzig, Representative Mike Freeberg, Representative Mary Kunish Podine, Representative Sandra Mason, Senator Susan Kent, Representative Raymond Dean, Senator Sandy Pappas, Senator Chris Eaton, and Representative Deb Hillstrom. I think I got everybody. With that, we are going to follow the program as a press release dictates. We're starting with Mr. Ethan Roberts from the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas.
Thank you, Senator Franzen. It's really an honor to be here this morning, both with my colleagues in the Minnesota's faith community, as well as so many state legislators. This press conference this morning came together rather quickly last week. We'd received at our organization, we're based in Minnesota, we represent the Jewish community of Minnesota and the Dakotas, a request from our national partners to solicit buy-in from our local partners here in Minnesota for a community letter that was circulating throughout the United States of Jewish organizations, synagogues, community centers, Minneapolis Jewish federations, Jewish Family Children's Service agencies, the whole gamut of our community, to sign on and speak with a collective voice against family separation, against indefinite detention of children and their parents. And we were overwhelmed by the response that we received locally and nationally. So nationally, the letter was signed by nearly 350 Jewish organizations, both national organizations and state and local organizations. Here in Minnesota, we had over 30. Which was the second most number of organizations at the state level, only behind New York. And New York has a few more Jews than Minnesota. We're not even number two, not even in the top 5. So I think it speaks to something about our Minnesota Jewish community. And I think it speaks to something of our interfaith community here, that when I reached out to Senator Franzen, I said, okay, the letter's nice, but what else can we do? And Senator Franzen suggested, well, can we bring some of the other faith communities to the Capitol, that they answered the call and that they're here as well. Because whether you're personally a Republican or a Democrat or very nonpartisan as our organization is, whether you're Jewish or Christian or Muslim, or of other faith traditions, we all know that a society is judged by how we treat the most vulnerable among us, which definitely includes immigrants. And I'm not going to read the whole letter, but this is really the main thrust of it, just one line of it. Our Jewish faith demands of us concern for the stranger in our midst. Our people's own history as strangers reminds us of the many struggles faced by immigrants today and compels our commitment to an immigration system in this country that is compassionate and just. That's why we're all here today. That's why we're here to put pressure on Democrats and Republicans, the administration and Congress alike, to do something, do the right thing, be the government that we, the people, deserve and that we demand of you. Thank you.
I'm Reverend Andrew Cousins, Bishop Andrew Cousins, delighted to be here on behalf of the Minnesota Catholic Conference. All of the bishops of the United States were gathered together for our annual spring meeting just 10 days ago, and there was a unanimity among us, especially in the condemnation of this practice of separating children from their parents in our immigration system. And I feel privileged myself just to stand here with these other faith leaders and really as a witness for the life and the dignity of our immigrant brothers and sisters who don't have voices that we have. Of course, I have come to know many of them as valuable members of our community, and also I've come to know personally the suffering and the poverty that they often flee when they come here to our country seeking safety. And so I'm really discouraged by the way the rhetoric has happened on a national level from many different sides that speaks about our immigrant brothers and sisters in a way that dehumanizes them. It's very important that we recognize they come here seeking the same thing that my ancestors came here seeking: a safe place to raise their families, a good job, to be able to provide a livelihood. And we should also remember that if we can provide these things, we have a moral obligation to do so. It simply falls under the golden rule: do unto others what you would have them do unto you. And so I can agree when our leaders of our immigration system speak about a broken system, and it has been broken for many years. And that's why this current crisis is a reminder that many people share the blame for our undocumented citizens, our undocumented people being here with us, and that we need a comprehensive fix to our immigration system. So if there's one thing I would do today, it would be to beg the leaders on both sides of the aisle to come together for a comprehensive fix for our immigration system. And this must be done in a way that respects the vulnerability of children and families, the way our country has always tried to protect children and families. And of course, this indefinite retention of children and families, this separation of children and families must cease. And we have to find a way already now to reunite those who have been separated. So really, I stand with all these other faith leaders, privileged to be here amongst them. And I think we speak with one voice, which is begging our administration, our elected leaders on both sides of the aisle to come to a comprehensive reform of this question in a way that respects those who are here and provides for them a way to become permanent contributing members of our society. And since we helped to create this problem by not dealing with the immigration system, we need to deal with it in a just way.
I'm Rabbi Sim Glazer of Temple Israel in Minneapolis, and I'm representing the Minnesota Rabbinical Association this morning. There is little more viscerally disturbing to a Jewish sensibility or to our historical memory than witnessing a family fleeing instability or sure peril and seeking shelter in this country, only then to be separated, parents from children, and then imprisoned with a desperate uncertainty as to whether they may ever see each other again. Is there anything more horrific to any one of us? In the Torah, our sacred scripture, most laws are mentioned just once or twice. But in the 5 books of Moses, no fewer than 30 times we are admonished to welcome the stranger into our midst. Why is that? Because we too were once strangers in a strange land, many times over, as a matter of fact, to date. Jewish tradition teaches that to save one life is to save a world entire. The sanctity of even one human life, one human future, is holy. But today, here in the land of freedom and opportunity, we are treating individuals as numbers. We are incarcerating the children of strangers. We can sit back and we can say this is entirely political. We can say this is about policy. We can say this is about a certain kind of people that we don't want here. But these are not abstract numbers. We are dealing with human beings here, and what we are doing to them is immoral. I cannot think of any religious system, an honorable political party, or any American citizen that could possibly deem this as ethical. My mother, of blessed memory, was separated from her parents in 1939 in Germany, and she made her way to this country to start a new life, but never to see her own parents again alive. Even in those difficult times, this very country was sending desperate people back to their deaths in Europe, deeming them a certain kind of people, undesirable on these hallowed shores. We know how wrong it was back then when we look at it historically, and one would think that with that kind of history behind us, we would know better now. Isn't our nation better than that? Years from now, do we want to look back at this moment in American history and admit we allowed such a thing to happen? Are we going to say, well, it made our country safer, or we didn't have enough judges to apply due immigration process, or that we said nothing, stunned into accepting yet another irrational act of an administration run amok? There comes a time when a nation of individuals must raise our human individual voices in the presence of a real human tragedy. We have long been a nation of immigrants, and each group can testify to some moment in history where we were treated unjustly, and also that blessed moment where this country did the right thing. How will future Americans speak of this moment? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Judy Halper. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Jewish Family and Children's Service of Minneapolis. I stand here today as a citizen, a mother, a grandmother, a psychologist, and as the Chief Executive of a nonprofit organization established more than 100 years ago as a resettlement organization meant to successfully resettle people, refugees, immigrants, and those that were coming to these shores in search of a better life. We have continued as a network throughout North America to resettle people over the last century or so, wherever they may be coming. It is logical to oppose the administration's actions of separating children from their parents at our southern border. Doing this in the name of enforcing the law is really in violation of our sense of humanity and our faith, and will, of course, cause long-term, if not permanent, damage to the children affected by this policy and the enforcement of it. Our country has been a refuge and a beacon to the world on how to accept others from foreign lands and how to treat them. And as was previously mentioned this morning, it is a basic tenet of our country to treat others as we would want to be treated. All of us here today stand here because at one point in our ancestry, this country welcomed those that came before us and gave us a chance. And that is the basic level of humanity that we would want to embrace today. And I stand here on behalf of a network throughout this country that stands ready to help immigrants and refugees wherever they may come in order to have the basic skills and the basic needs met so that they can become contributing members of our society. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Reverend Doug Mitchell. I'm on the board of the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition, and I'm here representing the Minnesota Council of Churches. People of faith and others of goodwill, whether of faith or not, are speaking out across the country against the zero tolerance policy that has been instituted on our southern border. This policy, as it's implemented, changes daily. It may be different than what we heard on NPR on the way in, but we know that whatever it is treating families by welcoming them into incarceration. That even if children and their families are kept together, they are kept together in jail, whatever that jail may look like, whether it's a tent or a fence, it is a jail. The new policy of keeping families together is some improvement, but it is not yet a just policy that we can stand behind. As a follower of Jesus, I have to wonder how this country has come so far from Jesus' admonition to let the little children come unto me. Jesus singled out children for his love and caring and as an example to all. I also condemn Attorney General's selective use of Scripture by citing Romans 13:1 to obey the law, presumably whatever that law says, while ignoring the higher scriptural demand later in that same chapter that says that all commandments are summed up by this word: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. So to quote just one verse out of this text is simply misuse of biblical message. Now, there are clear biblical and theological grounds that we've heard this morning against this policy, but let's not lose sight of the damage that this is doing to the children themselves. As you were just called forward, the permanent brain development trauma can set these children back in ways that socially and psychologically they may never recover from. So simply on the value of the protection of children, regardless of the faith commitments, those two things together should call us all to find a way to change the policy on our southern border to a more just and open policy. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is John Keller. I'm the Executive Director of the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, and I've been asked to provide a bit of an update and a legal context to what's going on, but I really want to emphasize that the importance of this press conference and the voices you've heard come from a moral and a religious perspective that unites many, many, if not all faiths, including my own, and is and should be the predominant voice from today. There is so much to talk about in the current situation that we're facing. Unfortunately, what I am forced to talk about is the lack of respect for the law and the facts of this president and the administration in creating a crisis where there was none. The border itself prior to this, even though described in opposite terms by the president, was at one of the lowest levels in the last 40 years in terms of arrests on the border. President Trump arrives in Minnesota last week, and everything related to the border revolved around criminals, MS-13, and the intentional planting of the idea that the folks arriving at the southern border in this alleged crisis need National Guard troops and zero tolerance, when in fact the folks arriving on the southern border from the 3 countries in Central America are victims of that violence and have a right under both U.S. law and international human rights law, of which we are a signatory, to a fair process without detention or penalization in seeking asylum. We read in the last couple of days a number of continuing signs that indicate this crisis is nowhere near being resolved. For the several days immediately after the executive order was signed on Wednesday, there was no press briefing. No official came forward through any of the regular press briefings, nor on the Sunday talk shows to talk about either the previous policy or the change in policy. We've seen the blaming of Democrats. We see Sunday and Monday the president calling for the removal of individuals with no access to courts or due process as somehow the solution the rejection of additional judges on the border to hear and to decide asylum claims, contradictions by the Commissioner of Border Patrol saying that zero tolerance has stopped, while the Attorney General says that it's continuing. We have now exchanged with the executive order the chaos of separation of children with the impending chaos of internment of families on military bases. There is a wink and a nod in the executive order that the Flores decision, the clear Flores decision that was updated in 2016, that says children, even when they're housed in detention with their parents, cannot be held for more than 20 days, that somehow the administration is going to get that same judge only 2 years later to allow indefinite detention. That is not the case. The administration will be presented, again, if they follow through with family internments, of deciding whether or not to release the families on day 21 as a unit or release just the children into separate facilities or into the community. It's important, I think, for the press, as well as for folks who have the privilege to speak about this issue, to be clear and honest about the underpinnings of why we're in this crisis. And if that includes, as I contend, and I think many people agree, pointing out mistruths and exaggerations and misapplication of both fact and law by the administration, that is our collective duty on behalf of those who are suffering, who are some of the most vulnerable on the planet, at the hands of one of the most powerful countries. It is my hope that folks will both use their faith and their feet and show up on June 30th at any of the protests in Minnesota for this policy. It's also my hope that good people of Minnesota and across the country will continue to support frontline legal offices and social service offices and child welfare offices that are trying to do work that the government has presented in this self-made crisis. And it's also my hope that persons will exercise their ability to vote in the upcoming elections, vote for individuals who prioritize due process, fairness, the underpinnings of 3 branches of government in this country, and elected officials who care about new Americans, both in-state and federally. We have information on Immigrant Law Center Minnesota's website about organizations on the front lines doing this work, as well as other ways to be active. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I also want to recognize Senator Jim Carlson, who joined us. We will open it up for questions from the press.
Senator, could you react to the news from the Supreme Court upholding the travel ban that just happened too?
Thank you for that question. We just all received the AP notice on it. I have not had a chance to read the opinion. As an attorney, details matter, and I don't know if our attorney expert right now on immigration law has had a chance to look at it either. It was fresh off the press, and you know, the president has the ability to have the executive order powers, but we also have Congress, who has the ability to make laws for the country, and I think the Congress needs to act if we're going to be the beacon of immigration and hope that we've always been, and have refuge for immigrants, which our country is founded on. Again, Congress has the ability to make laws to change that.
And would you say this decision adds more urgency to congressional action?
Without reading the details, I can't say that for a fact, but I can say that it certainly is relevant to a comprehensive immigration package that Congress should be looking to pass.
I noticed that the letter went out, this one, on July 20th, the very day that the president signed his executive order. Have you heard anything formally back from the Attorney General, the Department of Justice, other than the president signing very publicly that executive order?
what we've heard is what the entire public has heard of. We in Minnesota, as a state government, I represent the state legislature. We don't have a purview over federal immigration laws, but certainly would like to know more because as a state, we also have had to deal with a few years back when the unaccompanied minor situation, it's not changed. It's actually been aggravated with the families that we've heard in the last few weeks. We certainly want to know more information how this is going to be tackled because even our state has been asked to send a National Guard to the border, and we've heard from the governor that he's not going to accept that or comply with that request. So there's certainly some elements at the state that we need to be vigilant upon and how we're going to be asked to comply or be, in my opinion, complicit to something that's not really a moral issue of our time.
Congress is supposed to take up, the House, excuse me, is supposed to take up a vote on this possibly this week on a compromise bill. What's your urging? What's your thoughts on that? Is it too little, too late? Is it not enough?
Well, it depends. It depends on the details of the package and what the compromise is. Certainly, not all sides are going to get what they want, but I do know that when we had complete control in here in Minnesota, we were able to pass certain bills like all-day kindergarten and marriage equality, and those haven't been overturned. So if there's a will, there's a way to pass it and get signed into law. The question is whether it's going to be a bipartisan bill that tackles all the issues, not just the border issue and separation of families, the Muslim ban, and also DACA and border security. All those things and elements have pieces that people on both sides of the aisle can compromise on, but also pieces that are toxic for either side. And I'll open it up if any of my colleagues would like to comment as well at this time if there's no further questions. Well, thank you again for being here, and our intent is to continue to put pressure on our federal leaders to pass something this week and tackle these issues once and for all, because if not, we're just going to have these press conferences regularly because we're not going to be solving the issues at hand today. So thank you for being here.